It looks like it is time for a coffee break. Okay, and welcome to the Media Spigot Studios here in Bellevue, Washington. I'm your host, Ryan Douthit, and this is our ongoing live daily series called Coffee Break, because we like drinking coffee. Joining me in the studio here is Jason Vo. He is a video editor, senior editor here at Media Spigot, and very well known within the Seattle film industry. And I'm not going to say very well known in a Harvey Weinstein kind of well known. Let me turn up your mic here. Do you a favor so people can actually hear you. Why would they want to do that, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, and then also behind the switchboard we have Joe, who's going to try to keep up with the show and switch us around as necessary. Today's topic was originally going to be about Halloween, but considering we actually are going to do a show tomorrow, which is actually Halloween, we're just going to hold that off till then. So instead, today's topic is going to be dumping Adobe, because as we all know, Adobe announced some new product updates recently, and that has a lot of people kind of in a bit of a tizzy. And you can't really blame him. I mean, basically, the big holdout was Lightroom. You know, photography. You do like thousands and thousands of photographs, and then Adobe announced that they're calling Lightroom, the old Lightroom that was installed on your computer, Lightroom Classic, and the new Lightroom is Lightroom, just Lightroom CC. And with Lightroom CC, every single photograph you take and is on your hard drive uploads to the cloud, which means that you have to have a perpetual subscription to Adobe to the end of time to still access your photographs. Jason, what do you think of that?
Am I allowed to swear?
No, this is a family show, and as I said, some of the ladies from church might be watching.
Okay. Well, it's a crock. I'm not a fan. It seems like every year when they announce a version that's about all these new features, and then half of them are either half-baked or completely broken, and then stuff that used to work don't work the way they did, or, again, like something's broken. Like
Right. And at this point, they're asking you to entrust your entire photo library to them, to the cloud, for their safekeeping, and forever and ever paying them a fee. And that same, Premiere hasn't yet gone cloud, but is Premiere cloud around the corner?
Probably. I mean, you can store your footage on their cloud system. I've heard of people using that for workflows, like sharing proxies for projects with directors and producers. Mm-hmm. That way they can just open up a little file. They have everything there that they need to just kind of open up and skim through if they're savvy enough to mess with the software.
Okay, well, I think probably a better way to kind of approach the show is let's just go app by app and talk about what are some of the alternatives to each app, because obviously there are some issues here from the video side and from the photography side. There are issues with Adobe's new strategy. However, I'm here to tell you that you don't have to play that game. You can actually ditch Adobe. And to give you a little bit of my background, I started using Photoshop and PageMaker in 1991. I was a senior at Lake Washington High School. I was a layout editor for the school newspaper. I don't know why, but we had the best desktop publishing setup imaginable in a high school. I think studios didn't have a setup as good as we did. We had our writers, we had 12 Mac Pluses for writers, and then for the layout department, we had two Mac, I think there were two CXs. They were the box ones with the lids that would come off. You could put cards in. And we had grayscale scanners on each of them and large 17-inch grayscale displays, which at the time was like mind-blowing stuff. So let's go ahead and start from the top. And the big one is Photoshop. Photoshop is the staple of things everywhere. I mean, so many art departments, and it just... Photoshop is everywhere, from video production to art departments to publishing to magazines. It's a hard one to replace. However, I have recently been using an application, what's it called? Affinity Photo. I recently did I can't share the photos with you because client photos. But I recently did a CEO photo shoot, and in it when you're doing a CEO photo shoot, you don't just take the photos and hand them to the client. You go in and you fix blemishes, you fix complexion, you take a little bit of the darkness out from under the eyes where applicable. I'm not saying that they were out late the night before, but some of them were kind of out late the night before. You fix all that stuff. You give them the best version of themselves. And so you can't just go with an application which brings photos in and pushes them out. You need to do some subtle, and that's the key thing, is you can't do these brutal edits. You have to do very subtle changes. And subtle changes require a lot of layers. They require a lot of like little nuanced effects. And historically, these third-party apps are the ones that just wouldn't give you these nuanced effects very well. So I did all those edits in Photoshop a few weeks ago. I loaded up Affinity Photo because I was kind of annoyed with Adobe. And I'm constantly annoyed with Adobe. Like every year, they come out with something where I'm like, oh, man, do I still have to use this app? I mean, now think about it. We have a studio here, so we have 4 seats. 4 seats of Adobe apps, that's a lot of money on an annual basis. I mean, we could buy a couple nice prime lenses for what we're spending. Well, not nice cinema primes. You can buy some nice photo primes for the amount of money that you're doing with that. So Affinity Photo is pretty good. Going on to Illustrator, I'm just going to touch on it quickly. Back when I was in magazine publishing, we used it all the time. However, these days, I really just use it for simple logo work. It's really not a big deal. So actually, Affinity also has Affinity Designer, which seems to honestly handle 99% of what I need in an illustration program, which is kind of good. You know, it's not like something that was going to avoid, basically preclude me from switching, not having a good designer app. But it's nice to know that I can also have that in my pocket for the times where I need to bring in an Illustrator file, monkey with it a little bit, tweak it here and there, maybe clean up a client's work before we start doing extrusions or something like that on it. Because you ever had to do one of those client things where the logo's fine, but here, you go fix it, right?
Oh yeah. Well, remember for Ammo's training series, the Illustrator file, I had to go and basically rebuild it just for video.
Right. Because when you're doing print or you're doing web and the destination is bitmap or some kind of a raster image, honestly, it doesn't matter how you build it. You can take some shortcuts. However, when you're doing it for video, when you're doing extrusions or you're doing any kind of like video work with it, very often you have to have it built in a very specific way. And like that thing just wasn't really built in a specific way that was beneficial to us. Nobody else would notice except for like a video company. Yeah. So here we are.
Yeah. Now, does that Design Pro, does it also act as a substitution for InDesign?
No, you can't.
No.
See, now that segues us to InDesign. If I was still in publishing, thank God I'm not.
Oh, the stories you've told.
Oh, publishing. Just quick aside for those who don't know, I was a publisher of Subi Sport magazine. I've published a number of magazines. I've done Computer Source magazine here in the Pacific Northwest. I was the publisher for that for the many years. So I have a lot of, basically I have a decade of print before I came back to video. So yes, many stories, many Comdex shows, many weird Comdex shows. Anyway, as we were saying, InDesign is one of those applications. Quark is not, I've hated Quarks from the beginning. I never liked Quark.
Is that still around?
It still does exist as a company so far as I know.
Okay.
Maybe, does anybody else know? Does it not? I'm pretty sure it exists. I'm 99% sure that still exists. But that level of work, I think maybe because it's just not a hot space, you don't see people really jumping in. I mean, you'll always have like Microsoft Publisher. That'll be an app that'll, basically dinosaurs and cockroaches will come back, rule the earth, and they'll be using Microsoft Publisher. But for professional work, it never quite did it. And if we would be having a totally different conversation today if I was still using InDesign, because InDesign is amazing. I went from by the way, back when I was in high school, we did use PageMaker, and of course, Adobe, there was so much legacy code in PageMaker that they just designed a whole new application to replace PageMaker. It was a little bit of growing pains, but by the time we were doing magazines in the late 90s, early 2000s, that was... It was all InDesign. InDesign's amazing. Okay, I've already touched briefly on Lightroom. But the one app that I've already been using Lightroom in conjunction with Capture One, which is by Phase One. And Phase One, of course, people are like, well, is it Pro? Well, Phase One, what they make are 100 megapixel Pro studio bodies. So yeah, it's Pro. It can handle it. And I think that's what some people don't like, is that it's not very approachable. It's like all of the unapproachable aspects of Lightroom in one application. Yeah. So it can do everything Lightroom can do. It's just less friendly.
Oh yeah. But
it has the media management, it has layers, it has correction brushes, it has 90% of what you need. You can link it to Affinity Photo so that you can basically round trip from Lightroom to Affinity, do your changes, come back, it then updates in Capture One, which is great. So, and I also have to say, I think that when you're importing specifically A7R2 or A7S2 footage, that the default color that Capture One brings in, because when you're bringing in RAWs, the application has to apply the color profile to the photo, at least a default of it. And I think that Capture One does a better job than Lightroom anyway. The only downside with Capture One is they seem to take a little bit longer to come out with new camera profiles. So like when the A9 came out, it was Lightroom had A9 about 2 to 3 weeks before Capture One did. But they do a pretty good job. And the best thing about Capture One, $300. You buy it once, it's $300. If that's too much money, it's $15 a month if you want to do a subscription. But the whole reason, well, not the whole reason, but one of the reasons for dumping Adobe is not paying that subscription. The fact that some of their applications have been super crashy lately, that's another topic. And that brings us to Premiere. Jason's favorite topic.
Premiere.
Now, personally, I don't use Premiere. So this is not a big deal for me, really, quite so much, other than the fact that I don't want to keep paying the Adobe money for the studio here. But instead of ransom money, I'm now just calling it Adobe money. We will take your child, but we will want Adobe money. We want 5 subscriptions to Adobe Creative Cloud.
I just call it a tax rebate at this point.
Yeah.
So I can write it, because it's...
So I use Final Cut X, and when I started hiring editors for this space, I know, years ago, it has been years ago now, which is weird. The level of editor quality that I was seeing with all of the submissions for Final Cut 10 were well below the abilities of the people who were doing Premiere. So I had to make the studio decision. I'm like, well, I like Final Cut Pro X, but what's going to be best for the clients and for what's going to be best for the workflow here in the office? So I bit the bullet and I hired 2 guys who were Premiere guys. And I have to give props to Jason, because I did give him a ton of jobs in Final Cut X when he first started working with me. And he did it. He was willing to use Final Cut X, and he still uses it on occasion today.
Begrudgingly.
Yeah, begrudgingly. Well, I do get some complaints back and forth on that. But tell me, what's been your experience with Premiere?
Well, you mean like as a whole, or just recently?
Just recently, kind of like where do you see that application going, and is it good for what you're doing?
It's still kind of a toss-up. Like, I'm hoping, after these yearly releases, a few weeks they'll put out a patch to fix a bunch of stuff, and so that's kind of where I usually set my benchmark. Because every other major release, it's either super stable, everything works as intended, or it crashes and I get files that are corrupted, and then I have to roll back. So it's always been a toss-up, and for me, it's always been, there's been a pattern where you'll get like 2 really good yearly releases, and then you'll get 2 really bad ones. Like, it alternates.
Right.
And so, with my calendar, this is like the second year of like the really bad, unstable issues.
Right, and there was an interview I saw with one of the leads over at Adobe, and specifically it was I think it was Cinema 5D. Maybe it was somebody else. Anyway, they were doing a video interview with Adobe at the launch, and they were asking about stability, and Adobe basically doubled down on what they were doing and said, every version we have an excellent process in place, and every version is more stable than the other. And so I'm kind of wondering, are they fixing things that like don't affect anybody way on the back end, and it's the ones that actually crash you on the front? Oh, those have been increasing, but we've been taking care of all these other ones.
Yeah, it really annoys me. It just feels like they're not really willing to listen to their customer base at that point. Because, like with the Mac Pros, if you had the cylinder Mac Pros with the higher end graphics cards, I think it's the D700s. For most of us, we were having an issue where if we did the Mercury renderer, any project that was longer than 10 minutes, you would start getting these green artifacts in your output.
Yeah, that's not good.
It didn't matter if it was a 4K red project or if it was a DSLR shot at 720.
Why would you want to fix that?
Yeah, I don't know. But yeah, so I had issues that, like that. I went in the forums. Everyone who had the same graphic setup as mine were talking about how they had these issues.
Yeah.
But then Adobe would say, we can't replicate this. Like, we're not having these issues.
It's like everybody but you.
Yeah, and it was one of the things like hundreds of people would just be chiming in. Yeah, me too. We're having this problem also. And there's even someone in the forum that said, hey, it's like I live within like 10 miles of one of your offices.
Yeah, I'll go over, right?
Yeah, I'll bring it and go over. And it was like, they were kind of like, no, we
don't operate that way.
And then people kept pushing, and if I remember right, like eventually they did take it in, but then it was the same thing. Oh, we didn't replicate it.
Joe, you've been using Premiere for 2 years now. How do you feel about it? Does it crash for you at all?
It did every once in a while, very periodically it would crash, but I've always used Premiere since college.
Since college, all of last year.
Wait, last year? Wait a minute, 2 years ago, right?
Yeah, I'm going to be using that joke on you even when you're like, you're going to be 40 years old. You'll be like, I've been here for 20 years. Stop using that joke.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I'm just going to have to be like, yeah, okay. Yeah. Yeah. But that's kind of where I first learned how to edit was just with classes and stuff like that, and then just used nothing else really. I try to use the Resolve, but.
Yeah, I'm going to pull the old man card here, and I would say, that's great. You know where I learned to edit? In a tape jog shuttle bay, tape to tape.
Oh.
We did have, over at the college, one nonlinear Amiga setup, but you had to be a senior to use that.
Yeah, at the Art Institute, we had the tape to tape with Beta SP, and we had a Media 100.
Nice.
But yeah, whenever the Media 100 got mentioned, you hear people just go, oh, God.
But
no.
the one thing that I'm kind of surprised with is how little things have changed since tape to tape. I mean, even nonlinear, you're still dealing with, you're just going from basically one angle to another angle or to a B-roll shot or something like that. The premise is the same. You could learn on a jog shuttle at this point and still, I think, make the jump pretty easily. The only thing is you have all these effects now. That you can apply, and then compositing and all that stuff, which brings me to the next topic, which is After Effects. So After Effects, I will admit I've dabbled in it. I've done some stuff with it. I'll have a specific need, so I'll go in, learn how to do that one thing, and then put After Effects back on the shelf for another 6 months. However, Jason here, you use After Effects way more frequently, don't you?
Yeah.
Now, how often is your After Effects hit?
I mean, lately it's just been generating new title designs for some of our projects. So it's been a lot lighter than it used to be over the years. Like before.
Well, we're not doing major films here.
Yeah, I mean, like before it was like when I was at Monolith, it was like, oh, we're getting all these assets, and we're just animating everything, and it's like you spend 6 weeks in just nothing but After Effects.
Right. And so, I guess I jumped the gun a little bit here because we never really said what we were looking at, and this isn't a final decision because obviously moving a studio from one platform to another is kind of a big deal. However, I have been known to jump the gun on many things in the past.
Final Cut.
Hey, Final Cut rules, man. I can edit so fast in that thing. Or the time where I decided to, hey, let's do a daily live show. Sure, why not? But what we're what we're evaluating here is DaVinci Resolve 14, because 14 seems to have finally added enough edit tools to get it kind of almost a replacement, maybe. So what was it, last weekend? Or last week, I put together a Resolve server so we can do collaborative work. And this is the thing with Resolve, even if you don't use it as an editor, it still is like the best color tool you can get. So, I mean, well, you know, in a small studio budget. So even if we don't end up using it as an editor, all this stuff still applies. We're still going to we're still going to continue using it for color and whatever. But it's looking like with 14 that it might actually be a viable replacement for Premiere. What do you think?
It's getting there. 'Cause I'm actually doing a project at home, a little web series thing. So it's just to kind of get acclimated to a little more. I think, some problems, like I know you ran into with like the audio tools, like it was doing weird panning.
Yeah, it's just some of the stuff you take for granted in a more developed tool like Final Cut or even Premiere. I mean, I did edit in Premiere for a few years, so it's not like I'm completely unexperienced with Premiere. But some of the stuff you do take for granted, which is the really straightforward stuff. Some of these new tools, they focus on big whiz-bang features, and then you're like, well, I just want to take my mono track and I want to make it a dual left-right mono. How hard is it? Apparently with DaVinci, it's way harder than it needs to be.
I ran into a similar issue that you had with trying to set the mono to like a stereo to actually have it just come from the center. As I would pull footage in, it would randomly shove everything to like the left channel, even though it was recorded as just a mono neutral.
I could see film school students, the guys who shoot everything at 24p and think that the 5D Mark II is still the greatest gift from God. Those guys would be like, well, dude, why aren't you just filming everything in surround sound? That's what you need to do. Why would you want to go dual mono? Some of us work for a living, okay? So we've been, I'm hoping tomorrow that as part of the Halloween special, I will be able to, well, not special, but because tomorrow's Halloween, that I'll be able to do a breakdown on a really quick and dirty edit that I did for a client, but I have to make sure that they launch the video themselves. But we did a Halloween-themed video that we shot in, I think we filmed the entire thing in 24 hours. It includes some really simple compositing in AE, but I did the full edit in, it was my first full edit in DaVinci Resolve 14. So I'm going to probably go over that tomorrow, unless the client doesn't launch the video yet, or it's later in the day after the show. I don't know what time they're launching the video, so I need to make sure that it's public already before we talk about it here on the show. So, but one of the things that we hadn't played with quite yet, at least in the studio here, but I know you have a little bit of experience with it, you've at least dabbled with it a little bit, is Fusion, which is completely different than AE, but you can kind of do the same stuff with it. Explain the differences between Fusion, which comes from Blackmagic also, by the way, for those who don't keep track. DaVinci Resolve is their color editor, and then also has been adding audio and video editing features. They also own Fusion. Now, did they acquire Fusion?
Yeah.
All these have been acquisitions for them, haven't they?
Everything.
But they acquired Fusion back in version 2 or 3 versions ago, right? I think first thing they did is they bought it and it was like a Windows program, and then they ported it to Mac and Linux because that's their whole market, is selling hardware control panels for all these different platforms, and then giving. And then version 9, the version that just came out, was the first one where they added a whole bunch of features to, including planar tracking, stereoscopic cameras, a lot of VR stuff, the ability to do like a 3D space from a 2D space with a 3D camera, basically. So how has your experience been with Fusion?
It's been a while since I've actually really dabbled into it, but it's like a lot of the older node-based compositors. So
like kind of like Nuke.
Like Nuke, if you remember Apple Shake.
Oh yeah, Shake. Oh dude, remember Shake?
It's just like it, pretty much. Yeah, I mean it's basically the same thing. Like they're all they're all node-based compositors. So,
but being compared to Nuke's not a bad thing. I mean, like half the industry still runs on Nuke, doesn't it?
Yeah, and they do a subscription thing also for the people who can't afford the license.
Yeah, a Nuke seat isn't that like around $5K or something like that, or is it less? It's been a long time since I looked.
It's been about, I don't know, 5-7 years since I looked. But yeah, it was about that much. I mean, it was the same with Smoke from Autodesk.
Mm-hmm. Oh, Smoke. I thought that was even more. No, it's Flame. Flame is the really ridiculously like $500,000.
Yeah, and Smoke is the one that kind of, it's like an earlier version of Resolve. Like they start editing, adding editing features to it along with its color tools. So I mean, yeah, there's a lot of options for like the editing, compositing,
and this is the kind of the killer thing. And this is not why we would be making a switch if we did to the Blackmagic software. It's not the price, but the price is pretty crazy in the fact that you can get a fully functional, non-watermarked version of Resolve and Fusion for free. Yeah. You can just download it. Now, of course, you do pay more money for things like OFX plugins and like planar tracking and the 3D camera and the VR tools. Those are all part of the upgrade to the studio version of Fusion. And then with DaVinci Resolve, you get the plugin capability, but some other stuff as well. But for each of those, they charge $300. I mean, like, even DaVinci, wasn't that like $10,000 a seat like just 5 years ago?
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah, ridiculous expensive. The tools we have these days.
Yeah, it was $1,000 last year, and then
they dropped it.
Yeah,
and the Fusion, same thing. It was over 1,000, and now it's $300 for a perpetual license. That they are saying that if you buy the dongle once, that's it.
Yeah, and
you bought it.
And if you bought one of their like Ursa cameras, they gave you a free copy.
Again,
it's a $5,000 camera.
I'm still not terribly sold on Ursa cameras, but they look good, and I know some people like them. But that's pretty incredible. You buy the camera, you get the software.
Yeah, and it's only the second generation of the camera, like their Ursa camera, second or third.
Right, right. Sony's been making cameras for how long?
What, over 20 years?
In the 70s, my grandfather had a Betamax shoulder camera with a deck that he put on his side. Yeah. That was a Sony. So since at least 1978.
1978.
And that wasn't even broadcast.
Yeah, I wasn't even around then. Like,
just say
I didn't get introduced until I came to school over here, and then even then it was just like, oh, we just have these cameras, so you're gonna do it because we had to use these back in the day. So.
Right, back.
Yeah, yeah.
Those were simpler times.
Yeah. Oh, Joe just wants to get on camera. What was that, Joe?
Those were simpler times.
Yeah. What cameras did you use back in college? Way back in college.
Ooh, let's see. Canon 5D.
Get out.
And then the Sony A7.
Oh my God.
Oh,
in college you used an A7?
Actually, yeah. And then I remember I had to intern. I can't remember what camera exactly, but it was with the P2 cards, one of those big.
Oh yeah, it was
HVX 200.
Yeah, that's what it was. Yeah.
Okay, I'm turning your mic off, Joe. I'm feeling really too old now.
See, that was a great camera.
What the P2 camera?
The HVXs, yeah, those were great.
Oh yeah, those things were bulletproof. I knew a lot of guys who got started. Yeah. When I first met the guys from Tangent Vector, we were both at a Ford event, and they were shooting it for Ford, and they had one of the P2 cameras. I think at the time, I had just bought a what was it? It was NX5U Sony. So I was shooting on SD cards, and dude. Hey, Tom, Tom gave me such a hard time. He's like, I don't trust those. There's no way I would trust those. And it's like, I can't blame the dude. I mean, of course, you have a P2, which is like bullet-proof, bomb-proof, built for the BBC media, and you're looking at this dinky little here's one. Little dinky SD card. You're like, I'm going to trust my livelihood to this little thing. But over the last 10 years, they've turned out to be pretty surprisingly reliable. I'm not going to say we've had no failures, but they've been really good.
They're about as good as like all the other high-end media.
Basically, yeah, at this point. And you're looking at what? This is 128 gigs, and this is the Extreme Pro 95 megabit per second, and I think I paid like $60 for this.
Yeah.
And then they now have the new ones that are like 300 megabits per second, and they're $150 each if you buy them in bulk. That's again mind-blowing where we're going with this stuff. So Jason, I'll posit the question to you. Do you think that today we have enough stuff? I'm not saying that your answer is going to change what we do at the studio here, because we already have a plan, kind of. As much as I ever have a plan. Do you think that we have enough to dump Adobe safely and not regret it?
Not just yet. I mean, it's like you said, we have to look at some of the other tools that are available, like, Affinity Photo. Like, we got to brush up and you kind of, see how these new tools work compared to Photoshop. Because I've not messed with Affinity Photo. I've messed with Graphic. I've messed with GIMP years ago, which is an open source
GIMP
one.
does not count. I'm sorry.
I know.
Anybody who said, you should really use GIMP, I'm just like, no. They're kind of like the guys back when I worked in tech.
Yeah.
You would go to a show, and I worked for a PC manufacturer. I was in marketing, and we would go to these regional shows, and there was always some dude who would walk up and go, you should really pre-install Linux on that machine. I'm like, why? Nobody's asking us to, and honestly, the people who do, we do it. So I'm not going to push Linux on the world just because you feel like you have some vendetta against Microsoft.
So what you're saying is someone could be a DP and not have to own a Red.
Yes, it is possible.
Yeah.
Ugh, Red users. Ugh. Although we are actually going to have a Red user on one of my other shows next week.
Oh, yeah?
We're doing Driving Sports Live on the Driving Sports channel. And I have Matthew Johnson, who's he's a DP and films with Red for Ford. He worked on the most recent Jim Connor video with Ken Block. And then I'm also going to have another buddy on the show, Warwick Patterson, who is, yes, I'm doing a quick throw out to that other show on Driving Sports, which is another YouTube channel, by the way. And so Warwick Patterson is the producer and DP for Launch Control, which is an ongoing award-winning series that he does for Subaru. And I've shot with him on that, and that is always a lot of fun. I know he uses Premiere. I know Matthew Johnson, I think, uses Premiere. Do you think those type of guys are going to make the switch anytime soon? I mean, because Resolve here does have, this is the box for 12.5. We're actually up to 14 now. Although it just went from 12.5 to 14. Anyway, Resolve here does have studio cred because, of course, top color tool. So you're going to have it in the office anyway. Do you think that you see the Red users who shoot nothing but 24p, even if they're shooting action sports, are going to be moving to something like this?
Yeah, I mean, if it's easier to do your color and if the workflow for doing the editing is easy enough, why not? If it's going to save you time in the long run.
Now, I've heard that with Fusion, we're just going to kind of go a little bit deeper on Resolve and Fusion here. I kind of went through a quick online training with Fusion over the weekend to kind of get up to speed with it. And apparently the plugin for Resolve has versioning built into the plugin. So you can go in, do an effect or a composite, come back, and then if you go back again, it revises it, which to me sounds better than the round tripping with AE.
Yeah, it works the same way with your color too.
Oh, okay.
So you, like if I do a whole color session, and you decide that we want to change the color temperature, for this one scene, one setup, for whatever reason, I can just say make new version and just make an adjustment just to those. Right. And if you change your mind, it's just click a button and set it back to what it was.
Okay, well, I'm going to throw this over to Joe. Joe, so let's just say tomorrow I say you're not allowed to use Premiere anymore. You now need to use DaVinci. How do you feel about that?
I'm pretty open to the idea. I could give it a shot. I don't know. More knowledge, right?
More knowledge.
Is that the old saying they say? More knowledge, the easier? I don't know.
I've never heard that saying whatsoever. Maybe they say it back in Eastern Washington.
Can you put in the description his quote, more knowledge is better? Right.
I think we're going to get that printed and put it up on the wall right over there. Anyway, I think we're going to wrap this show up. I'd like to thank everybody for, all two of you, for tuning in live. This is a brand new show, so we don't honestly expect anybody to watch live quite yet, but it'd be great if you could join us. If you do join us live, we will field questions, but with one or two people watching, I don't see the point. Unless somebody wants to ask me a question, I'll be happy to answer it. So be sure to tune in every weekday here at 9 o'clock Pacific Standard Time at the Media Spigot Studios here in Bellevue, Washington. I'm not going to be here every day this week, though, because on Wednesday, I'm flying out to Las Vegas for the SEMA show. I am going to try to do a BTS kind of show live from there, but there's about 100,000 people landing upon Las Vegas this week. So the thought of finding a decent, even Wi-Fi to do a live stream with, I can't promise it. So we're gonna try to do something live from the show floor, and we'll see how that goes. So tune in 9 a.m. live every day. Yeah, Jason, if you wanna, you're good to go. If you want to go, you look a little itchy over there. Is it that wool hat?
It's cold in here.
Isn't that cold in here? I'm wearing a t-shirt. I'm good. I'm tough to work for. Okay, so again, thanks everybody for watching. We will see you next time right here, 9 a.m. tomorrow morning. We have the Halloween show. We'll see you then.
Later.
It looks like it is time for a coffee break.